every action that we do should be centered around a conviction of our purpose. Everybody has a purpose. But like everything, short-term, medium-term, long-term, the long-term purpose of our life should always be considered. Why are we doing something? Why are we doing any action? Should be based on a principle that says that freedom is central to all our endeavors. Freedom from suffering, freedom from pain, freedom from egoism, and therefore the urge for freedom is not selfish. Freedom for everybody. May everybody get this freedom. Now, is that freedom absent in us? No, Vedanta says it's intrinsically what is here, what is now. So it is a timeless sense of existence which is there, which we have yet to discover. And therefore, the central understanding is knowledge. We have to have knowledge in order to act as an antidote to ignorance. And so therefore, central to our discipline must be discernment, must be viveka, and must be practice, steady practice. So that everything that we do, and the theme of the Bhagavad Gita that we've been studying has been the theme of yajna, that is, actions that are done in a self-sacrificing way, in a non-egoistic way. And the background to it is that there's action and inaction, inaction and action, that you see all these actions that are done with a sense of egoism is done out of ignorance. And the definition of ignorance will be the attachment to an individual, supposedly individual entity, to which we attach a name, an identity, a characteristic. And when we attach to that, we become exceedingly proud about it. So attachment becomes a kind of compulsion, and that compulsion is individual to everybody, because the components of it, of that compulsion, will be the built-up characteristics that help endorse the attachment to it. That's why when we do a workshop on this, we study what the individual background components, the history, the story, if you like. Everybody has a story. And the story comes from yourself. We call that genetics, because that's how in our system. And then from the inputs that are there from the environment, comprising mother, father, sisters, brothers, anybody who was bigger than us, and comprises all the other information that comes from the environment, including what we gain from media. Nowadays, it's common practice to take a child, is a kind of lazy parenting sometimes. Take a child and stick the child fully engaged in front of a square box that we call television. We have no real, all of the things that children see on television are not designed by children. They're designed by adults and give an adult theme and an adult perspective. And so a child is learning all the time, learning more and more about this small thing that we call the world. The world is a small thing because the world is only confined essentially to your individual experience. The world is small for you. The illusion is that it seems vast. The illusion is that it seems to be everything there is, that it seems to be permanent, that it seems to be important and significant. Of course, it is in its own way, but we have to contextualize things in order to understand them. So knowledge is very important. We have that knowledge, and the knowledge is gained through a constant discernment about things that's necessary. And then when we act it out, we realize that is a central purpose, a central theme, a central destiny we are aiming for. And so every action that is not toward that seems to be a waste. Of course, we could argue that every experience has its value, even to teach us our own ignorance. We do something, it becomes painful to us. An obvious example is when a child sticks their hand too near a fire, and then the parental response is to protect the child, to give a painful experience possibly to the child. Then the child soon learns that there's a reason behind this parental action and control, and that is that when you stick your hand into this previously unknown thing called fire, you will burn yourself. And if you really want the experience, then the burning takes place, you see. So we might argue that there's a value to that, yes. But then there is a contrast. So every time we learn about something that is ignorant to us, it's another element of knowledge. Ultimately, that knowledge matures or has to mature into wisdom. Knowledge itself is not information, just to be clear. It's not information coming in. That's a part of it. But real knowledge is information that has significant value to you, that adds a certain value. Knowing that there is a place called New York, say, and never having been there, at least we have the basis for going there. Maybe a desire comes up in us to say, let me go there, let me experience what it is. Put it on a bucket list. Before I die, this is what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want, and so on. Try and achieve all that. But all these split up experiences will tell us something very significant, or should tell us something significant. You know, with age, all those experiences, you'd imagine that we would learn sufficient to enable us to change our behavior. And yet, tragically, what happens is, in order to change our behavior at a late stage, it becomes difficult because the habit is settled on the habit level, or otherwise called the unconscious mind. And it's very difficult to change an entrenched habit. When the mind is pliable, plastic, it's much easier to change. That's why we're centered on youth. So freedom is a very important component. When we plug it into what is our purpose, we have to understand that. Another thing we have to understand is that what we call a destiny, if we think it is separate from us, that also is a mistake, because our inner divinity is the same as that. There's only one central divinity, and there's only a oneness. In every sense, there's a oneness. Now, I think since last we met, possibly, or maybe not, there was such a thing as India Day. So, India Day, somebody asked me a question. This was a man who's previously been here, and he had the opportunity to ask me a question. The question wasn't verbalized, because he told me afterwards, I had a central question and you answered it for me. But how do we know that there's a oneness? Well, we don't have to go far to find it out, because in science itself, there's a seeking for a unity, a theory of everything, where we can centralize a common understanding into one thing, where we can centralize everything into one substance from which everything comes. And the central search for the basic building blocks of life is part of that. But you see, parts, plural. Now, philosophy tells us anything that has parts is not intrinsic to itself, is intrinsic for some other thing. Let me give an example. A carburetor in a car has no value by itself. It can sit on a shelf and nothing happens. But when you put it in conjunction with all the other moving parts, we have something called an engine, and that becomes useful to us and we can go with it. The human body has parts. The human mind has functional departments. So everything that we see in the objective world has parts, and it indicates intrinsically that there is something underlying it. And we find a unity there, something from which everything comes. Now you mentioned Brahman. That's what Brahman is. Brahman is that central oneness, that central source from which everything else comes or seems to come, but there's a reason why it's there. And non-dualistic philosophy says vivarta. That means there's an apparitional causation there. It seems to be like that. We can come to this central conclusion that there is oneness, even though there seems to be separateness everywhere. Seems to be. We have to put in that seems to be, and we can apply it everywhere. You seem to be sitting there, and I seem to be sitting here. So that's because our perception is like that. But these are not standard organs. And if we go down through other layers to a most fundamental layer of material existence, there we find a world which is very peculiar. It doesn't obey the standard classical rules that we are accustomed to. And the modern scientific conclusion is this familiar world is really just a representative world. It's just a symptomatic world of a reality which underlies it. And we see this as the reality, and we can't figure out what that is. To the extent that very well reputed scientists have made a statement that if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand it. Quantum mechanics, you don't understand it. It's statements to that extent. If you're not shocked or surprised by Niels Bohr, then you haven't really understood it. Things like this. And these are echoes themselves of the Upanishads. If you think you know, you do not know. See, that kind of thing. Those who think they know, they don't know. Those who don't know, they know.
It's like Socrates. The only thing he knew was that he knew nothing.
That he knew nothing. Exactly. See. Now we know something. Obviously, he was saying nothing in a total way, because nobody can really know everything in totality. That's why we have separate departments in our careers, in our life, and in science itself. We find not everybody can be specialist in every area. That's the beauty of a fragmented world where all the parts seem to fit in harmony, and there's a certain rhythm to it. And behind that rhythm, and the reason for that rhythm, is some central oneness and unity that religion calls God. So with that in mind, we can continue our study as advertised and promised of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And we see where we left off. We have to review one or two other things. So just to remind you, there are different types of yajna. Yajna, sacrifice, translated in English as sacrifice. It means something gets depleted on the one side and added on the other side. And the implication is that there is some giving up, some personal voluntary depletion on your side. And the reason why that it is because this yajna equates to karma yoga, some action that is done with this central purpose in mind, understanding that when we do some action that becomes liberating, then in some way we have to sacrifice some other aspect. And if you go through all of them, they cover all these various yajnas described, how many yajnas there are. For example, some people give up knowledge sacrifice. Some people give up wealth sacrifice. Some people give up hearing. Some people give up sacrifice breathing. If we look at all of those varieties of sacrifices, they all fit into one or the other of the various approaches toward freedom that we call yogas. We find there scope for Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga. We find scope for Karma Yoga. We find scope for Jnana Yoga, which requires a level of discipline, restraint of the senses. We find their provision for worship, Bhakti Yoga. After all, when you offer something, let's say a flower, 9th chapter, a flower, a leaf, something like that, a simple thing, done with some heartfelt feeling, then you're offering something. Not only are you offering something material, but look at the number of multiple sacrifices that you had to make. First of all, you had to go and purchase flowers. You had to maybe accumulate some level of wealth to do that. That requires a sacrifice of some kind. Some kind of inconvenience is there. And then you had to bring it here. And then you had to put it there. And if you want to make it worthwhile, if you want to make it meaningful, then you'll see the symbolism of the flower as some kind of token of your inner feeling toward the object of your devotion. And that is given. Here's a flower. I don't want it for myself. I give it to you. So there's this stanza, for example, before we go on to the next one, which answers the question, how does this freedom, this central purpose, the central goal ensue? Well, still on the theme of yajna, it says, Shrayan Taryamaya Jnanyach Jnana Yajna Paramtapa Sarvam Karma Kilam Partha Jnane Parisam Apyati. So what does that mean? Shrayan, superior. What is superior? Knowledge. Knowledge sacrifice is superior to wealth sacrifice. And you see the epithet that is applied would be this scorcher of foes, scorcher of enemies is the expression. See? All of us have enemies, but it would be a mistake to think that your next door neighbor is your enemy, or that Donald Trump is your enemy, or somebody else is your enemy, or whatever it is. That wouldn't be correct. That's what you may think, but you'd be wrong. Your immediate enemies are there in the mind itself. They arise as various characteristics of lust, various characteristics of greed, desire for power, desire for objects, desire for sustaining egoistic characteristics such as, what will people think of me? How will people value me? When people praise me, how do I react? When people blame me, how do I react? I'm concerned with success. I'm concerned with failure. I'm concerned with feeling worthwhile. And all of these things. So knowledge sacrifice, these are to do with scorcher foes, scorching the foes, taking them out completely is superior to wealth sacrifice, because wealth is a very inferior thing when compared to knowledge. And all karma, all action in its entirety culminates in knowledge of some kind. That's the meaning of it. Material things made for our use are fine for our immediate requirements. But when we overcomplicate our life and put them as a dominant thing, then we should realize in any event that a penalty has to be paid somewhere along the line. That's not to say we become devoid of wealth. No, wealth is important. Don't make that mistake that wealth is unimportant. There are some systems that stress that mistakenly. It's not like that. We worship Lakshmi. But knowledge, you see, develops into wisdom. That's the point. That's what we were discussing earlier. It embellishes the personality. It aids one to discern between the self and the non-self, the permanent and the impermanent, the real and the unreal. See that beautiful peace prayer, Asato Ma Sugamaya, Britaranyaka Upanishad. Lead us from, it was so well known, lead us from the unreal to the real. It's worth contemplating because you see, unfortunately, when prayers become popular, then we reel them off and lose the inner meaning of it. So lead us from the unreal to the real. Do we really evaluate this as something that is unreal? Meaning something that is impermanent. Or do we give it more value than that? Do we steer toward the real? Lead us from darkness to light. Darkness, ignorance, symbolizing ignorance. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Is it impossible to be immortal? Materialist atheists will say, when we finish with the body, that's it. Don't bother again. Live for today. Make hay while the sun shines. Difficult in Ireland. But so a neat little sanctuary, for example, is much better than elaborate things. And when we talk about, we can in fact include this in religion, where we become so attached to the ceremonies and rituals, that kind of thing, and we forget really the simplest symbolism of it. For example, Hindu temples are constructed in such a way to replicate the human body. And you go around, you circumambulate the temple. It's something that started probably with Buddhism anyway. But you perambulate and go to the inner courtyard, until you come to the garbha, the womb. And that's where the self resides, or what religious terms as God. Now, there are many people who do that, but don't know that meaning. But can you not sit down and do the same process through meditation? All worship and ritual should guide us toward a central point of stability. The simple prayer, derived from Christian scripture, be still and know that I am God. The very simple exercise that is done in the Christian version of meditation called centering. It was really developed by Thomas Merton, who picked these ideas up from Eastern practices and saw that it was valuable to apply in the Christian context. So there's a method by repeating it and say, be still and know that I am God. Next one, be still and know that, or be still and know, and then be still, and then be. Can you see the meditative process of that? See, you can take your mantra that your guru gave you and do the same process. You reduce each word or each phrase or each symbol back. You'll find that it is a replay, essentially, of the development or evolution of the world that is expressed in the Mandukya Upanishad as waking, dream, and dreamless sleep consciousness. And then wind it back, and you'll find be, there's a silence. So all our endeavor is to go back to that point, the point of least disturbance, where everything is profound and deep and still. I see people come here ostensibly to meditate, and for some reason, depending on your personality type, whether you are intellectual-centered people, head-centered people, or heart-centered people, or action-centered people, but people want to get away from this meditation for some reason. They need to enter into this deep realm where this silence exists, and to use all the endeavors and practices to lead them to that point. So in meditation, we typically take a theme, something. Of course, different types of meditation are there, but all designed to lead you to that central point. There are other people, for example, in Zen Buddhism, where one jump is all that you require. Like if there's a mountain, we consider this mountain to be called sadhana, spiritual practice. You can take the journey point by point. Most people require it, step by step. Make a preparation, like preparing a runway for a flight. Prepare it well, but where's the flight leading to you? Above the clouds, where no weather is there, where silence is there, where transcendence is there. But is it possible to take one jump, one leap? Yes. If you practice it, you can do it. When you're familiar with the transcendent, then one jump, two jumps, three jumps. Or you can take 24, 25, 26 jumps, go through all the elements. 24 principles are there in Samkhya. You can go through all of them, and each one is a seeming fragmentation of that one entity that we call Brahman. Seeming. What makes it fragmented? The mind itself makes it fragmented. The mind is a splitter, a fragmenter. It does it for a purpose. When I say it does it, it's not that we give it a personality. No. It's just a convenience way of saying it. Personalizing the mind. The mind is convinced it's an individual entity, but we won't go along with it in its interpretation. So recently, I've been engaged in a lot of interfaith activities. One interfaith activity was very interesting, was yesterday. And it was a group of Christians who are trying to form a kind of body that is there to monitor and enact some interfaith activities and dialogue. A commission. A commission that unfortunately deals with a wide range of geographical areas. Nevertheless, the intention is very good because every region has their own difficulties. But to illustrate, they brought out some very profound parables, Christian parables that Jesus gave. And one passage was from Mark 4. Mark 4 is not a car. So Mark 4 is a gospel passage. Right. So paraphrased, the kingdom is like a seed, you see, that develops into a vast tree. Well, the same passages we could take, it could have been directly derived from the Upanishads because we find the imagery there in the Upanishads. But the point is that the seed is subtle and contains an area, as it were, of potentiality. And everything is within it. The whole tree is within it. In that same way, the whole world is contained within that potentiality of the seed. It's very subtle. If we can learn to see it in both areas, we'll see a passage related to that here in this Bhagavad Gita. Since our environment is the tree itself with branches and leaves and activities and life and episodes and stories, and split up into daily occurrences and occurrences associated with our personal stories of family and finance and personal relationships and objects. But we have to learn to see all of that and understand, there, Lord, you are there. That's the reality. But as seen through my eyes, it looks like this particular world. Science also has that perspective now. Physics will also have that perspective, that there is a world of waves that are called coherent. And that breaks down. It becomes decoherent for some reason or other that they haven't figured out yet. The yogis figured it out in a general way to say that everything that we find is a series of waves. And if we want to classify them into two sections, we can say subtle and gross. If you read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, you'll find this clearly put out. There's all waves. The only difference between what you call mind and matter is a degree of subtlety, and we have to consider all this as waves. What about quanta? Quanta, packets of waves. Yes, we call them vrittis, whirlpools of waves. And in the mind, we have these whirlpools of waves, these quanta. It is these quanta that materialize into this very, very narrow cusp, this very, very narrow, crest of a wave, if you like. An infinitesimally small area, and beyond that, an infinitesimally huge vastness. And our world is only a tiny, tiny portion of it. And we exaggerate it into, this is my world, and fight about it. This is my land, it's not your land. This is my possession, not your possession. Currently, this is my body. I can do what I like with it. There's a kind of philosophy like that developing in a secular world like that. And so the story that came out was of Jesus, dealing with people on the shore. He's just given something like that, and he has a desire to get into the boat and cross over to the other side. If you look at the context, he's tired of worldly people and wants to cross over. Now, if you take the Buddhistic interpretation of the Tathagata, the crossing, the one that helps you cross the ocean of samsara, and also the Vedantic perception of the same thing, and the various analogies which are there of an ocean. The ocean is something that not only represents life, but also represents depth. And on the surface, it's turmoil. But below, it's calm. And the more we go, the deeper we go, the less the disturbance. This is what meditation is, the less the disturbance. Going to quieter and quieter areas. Not destroying anything, not squashing anything, not repressing anything, but simply being present. You see that beautiful statement, be still and know that I am God. And then to go, be still and know. And then be still and then be. What a beautiful process that is. But that wasn't their interpretation. Their interpretation was there was a storm brewing. And from a Western mythological point of view, or even they claimed a Middle Eastern mythological point of view, the ocean is a place potentially with dragons and unknown sea monsters and has to be gotten away from. And I pointed out a different interpretation, and their jaws dropped open because they saw, I'm not saying their interpretation was wrong and my interpretation was right or any of these things, but you see, we look at things from a different point of view. And when we go to something profound that is characterized as the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God or something like that, what we call Atman, then we find we have this common ground. When knowledge yields to wisdom, then we yield all fighting. We find this common unity of existence everywhere. So, the feeling that the mind has to be kept fresh and pure, like a flower, is much more conducive to spiritual growth than many, many exotic rituals and theologies and dogmas and doctrines, which sometimes have no meaning. Sometimes when people light a lamp, I ask, why do you light a lamp? Invariably, because my mother lit it, and her mother lit it, and so on. And every religion has got that meaningless aspect to it, which says that we are doing something, even in a so-called spiritual context, that has no real meaning, that has no knowledge to it. Sri Ramakrishna points this out. He is truly a man, a person, who has made money his slave. He is not fit to be called a man who does not know how to make use of money. This is in the context of the stanza about wealth sacrifice and knowledge sacrifice. Then what other attitude aids the growth of knowledge and wisdom? is a good question. And so we have now some passages that I pointed out last time that highlight the supremacy of knowledge. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena seva upadekshanti te idhanam jnaninas tattva darshinaha. Seek that enlightenment. I mentioned this passage last week, but didn't go into it. So, by certain methods, seek that enlightenment from the wise. The seers into the truth will instruct you in that knowledge. These are the gurus, the competent teachers, who have no other desire but to open the way for you. Selfless action, just an expression of pure love. There was a Saint Bernard, who was a Benedictine. In giving advice to abbots, he said, notice everything, turn a blind eye to something, correct a little, and cherish the brethren. He was talking about monastic brothers, but we can apply it to a competent teacher like that. The skill of doing that, who notices everything, turns a blind eye to some things, maybe hints at some correction, corrects a little, not a total little, but a progressive little, suitable for the person. But above all, cherishes, that is, loves the other. Of course, from the 1960s, 70s, the idea of gurus and so on became a difficult thing, because many people claiming that would have rode on the, what you call the gravy train, rode on the bandwagon of guru fashionability, you might say. But anyhow, so seek that enlightenment. How? By prostrating. Why prostrating? Because it's a signal of submission and openness, a willingness to be humble, a willingness to be put in a position where, to be put into a listening position, a willingness to carry out all the instructions that will enable this internal growth from knowledge to wisdom. By questions. See, we begin everything, and the viewers here don't know it, because before we switch the camera on, I ask, see, are there any questions? And then those questions happen to be somehow relevant to the passages that we're studying. So questions are important. You know the phrase, if there are no questions, there are no answers. But there always has to be some kind of questioning thing. Even small, subtle things. And the most important questions will be to do with practical spiritual practice. Not to do with information. Not to do with principles or the principles of philosophy. Unless, of course, they're there to remove central doubts that are impeding the practical implication of the practice. Because doubts have to be cleared. It's the teacher's job to clear up all the doubts. So questioning must be there on this basis that the only truth that we have is from direct experience. Not from scripture, not from the teacher, but from your own direct experience. Everything has to be directed to that. It is not from theory. It's not from a doctorate. It's not from intensive study. A teacher has to study, no doubt, to remove all the doubts, to have the scope and breadth to remove the doubts from every possible angle. And the Upanishads are immensely skilled at this because they bring a wide range of points of view. Approach it from this side. Supposing that doesn't suit you, approach it from that side. Whichever way you approach it, something will happen. And then finally, by service. Swami Ramakrishnananda was known for his steadfast and dedicated service to his Guru. So service, any little seva to the Guru. So through a reverent personal service, the devotee, the student, offers himself, herself as an oblation, an offering in the sacrificial fire of the personality of the master. Body, speech, and mind of the disciple are in this way dedicated to the bestower of knowledge. And I mentioned also Sri Ramakrishna with this, of what avail our prayer and devotion to an aspirant who views his master or mistress, that is Guru, as a mere human being. The disciple ought not to hold that master, for example, as a man. Before getting the vision of the deity, the novice sees the form of the Guru as a preliminary. This form metamorphoses into the deity. The disciple thereby understands that God and Guru are one and the same. One method recommended and advocated in the practice of meditation is to visualize the Guru in your heart and to see how that Guru and the God becomes the same thing. The master awakens the spiritual consciousness in that person. More than that, he leads the initiated, those who have personal instruction in spirituality, a mantra, an instruction about meditation, into Brahman itself. And if that aspirant is earnest about spiritual enlightenment, because that's a qualification of the student, disciple, whatever you like to call it, the aspirant will have to have above all a thirst, a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment. Then the Lord sees to it that he comes in contact with an enlightened one. The Lord himself does it. Don't think that you yourself did it. Don't think that fate did it. The Lord himself did it. Seek and the light is sent to you. Similar thing. Knock and it shall be open. Seek and you will find. Same kind of language is being used. Now the next question is, what is the hallmark of enlightenment? How would we know it? In yourself and in others? And so the next passage will deal with it. Yajñatva na puna moham evam yashyasi pandava yena bhutaniya asena drakshashyatmanya atomai. Knowing this, O Pandava, you will not again fall into this confusion. Knowledge means you don't have to repeat it again. You don't fall into the confusion again. It's known. That's it. And by this, you will see the whole of the creation. The beauty of this passage. By this knowledge, how will you know that you have this knowledge? Well, it's self-evident. But then you will see the whole of all of this creation, all of this, what was expressed as the kingdom of heaven in expressed form, manifested form, the analogy of the tree. You will see the whole of this in yourself. And in me. That is the totality. Both. See, two opposing is an example, funny story, placed here in a commentary. The two military detachments started firing at each other. Yet there was nighttime. And in the morning, they discovered they were shooting at each other. They're the same army. So in the dawn of knowledge, we realize, oh, I see, there was only one thing. You got that expression, I shot myself in the foot, isn't it? How many times do we open our mouth and shoot ourselves in the foot? Or do some action and shoot ourselves in the foot? Well, actually, everything is entangled. Everything is one. Everything is part of holistic oneness. You can't escape it. You can't think that there's some action or some thought will not influence anybody else or anything else. It doesn't happen in physics, and it doesn't happen in the spiritual realm either. And so Sri Ramakrishna also makes this commentary. Knowledge leads to unity, ignorance to diversity. Very simple. Knowledge leads to unity. We know that something is validly knowledge when it becomes more unifying. When it becomes splitting, diversifying, then there's a difficulty. And in interfaith, the activities I've been engaged in so recently, yesterday was this commission, and today was a very important and significant meeting because the national curriculum for primary education met to consult with us, with people like myself. They have a draft of the curriculum in terms of religious education studies. So there were some significant things there because there's a confusion about what is religion very often. And I was pleased to see the intention to reach toward the important aspects of religion, leading a good, upstanding moral life, for example. Understanding the aspects of different religious expressions. And of course, we had to remove some, or recommend that removed some passages that were coming at things from a historically biased point of view. See? So we're moving into a new area in this country, which is becoming more broad-based, more knowledgeable, more meaningful, and all of those things.
Swami, you want to have an input into the curriculum for primary education in Ireland?
No, only in terms of religious education.
Well, not even that.
Yeah.
In the Department of Education curriculum.
Yeah. Not only me, but many people.
Because the latest move is to stamp it out, ban it from schools.
Yes, that'll probably be the next move on it, but we'll take one step at a time. The whole idea is to encourage religious education in schools, for people to see the value of it. But there certainly is a move toward that. To stamp that
approach,
out. Yeah. So, but there's a great value, you see. And even if there is nothing like standard religious education, at least the principles have to be there. Namely, giving young people strength and faith in themselves primarily. Allowing them to unfold their true potential. We're going back to fundamental principles about education. They're espoused by Swami Vivekananda and Sister Nivedita as a result. Their views on education were naturally the same because one was derived from the other. But it's to see that knowledge is not something instilled in somebody. It is there already, awaiting awakening. That's the idea about it.
Yeah, education
tapping into it.
Comes from the word educo, which is to lead out.
Yeah. So it's to manifest that from within, and it carries through to the whole of philosophy. See, our oft-repeated principle that summarizes the whole of Vedanta: each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this from within. Manifest from within. It's not that we have to grasp it from outside. That's the point. So we have this, the means to transcend the evil of the many is now put out in this next stanza. It says, Apiched asi papebhya sarvabhya papakritmaha sarvam jnana plavena va vijinam santarishasi. Even if you are the most sinful of all sinners, the most deprived of humans, the most depraved, I should say, of humans, the lowest of the low, yet shall you cross over. See this idea of crossing over again. Cross over all this ignorance, all this sin, all this difficulty by the raft of knowledge. This comes back to my point about the idea of an ocean or water. In Jesus' case, he was going into a small boat, crossing to the other side. See? And the lake is not like the sea, but obviously the Sea of Galilee was a vaster sea than it is now. Now, because of erosion and various other things, climate change and so on, the sea is much smaller. But it is, after all, a sea where you look out and you won't necessarily see anything beyond the horizon. And in such a vast lake, obviously, the waves can come up anytime, particularly in a small confined area. And so by the raft of knowledge, what a beautiful analogy, what a beautiful concept, using this boat, this raft. Now, we say a raft, you see, blow in a raft because it's a small vessel, same thing. And a raft is something that is almost temporary, isn't it? It's not an ocean liner or anything. Yeah. So it's a raft, it's a temporary thing. This human body and mind is a temporary thing, temporary vessel that enables us to cross over the whole ocean. And so even if you're most sinful of sinners, yet shall you cross over by this raft of knowledge. That's what's required. The antidote. So how does jnana do away with karma? Well, yatai damsi samito gnir basmasat kurut arjuna jnanakniha sarva karmani basmasat kurute tata. As the blazing fire reduces fuel to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge reduce all karma, all action. By action is meant all the effects. And the principle of karma puts it in this way, that there are three forms of it. There's samchita, there's agamani, there's prarabdha. All of these are various versions of karma. Things compared to an arrow that is shot. You see, you can take it from your quiver, an arrow, put it into your bow and shoot it. Well, once it's left, there's nothing you can do about it. So the effect has to come. And then there's something that you're aiming for now that will have a future result. So broadly speaking, there are past things, effects that need to arrive today, past things that you packaged and are sent by DHL, but it was a little slow and now it's arriving today. Things that some of it arrives more immediately. There are things that you order today, which will have come maybe tomorrow, maybe to the next week, maybe next year, maybe 10 years time, whatever it is. Whatever you're experiencing now, you load it on the goods train and it arrives to you today. Don't complain about it. You yourself ordered it and arranged for the transport. And nature itself obligingly delivered it at your doorstep, and you signed it willingly or unwillingly. You have to accept it. But you see that the whole thing, imagine this, the whole thing can be reduced to ashes. Everything. And so the first remains stored up to bear fruit. That's the samchita kind of karma. And the second in the near future. And the third is working itself out. These are the three types. The fire of knowledge destroys the first two things, but not the last. We're still stuck with prarabdha karma. And so jnani, the person of knowledge, pays no more heed to that because it's inevitable. It'll arrive. Leave it. We'll deal with that effect. But it pays no heed, no more than he does to the shadow of his body, what was described as just a raft. The solemnity that self-knowledge brings can never be overemphasized. So this is the beauty of knowledge. There's one more dimension to it, which we'll mention, and then we'll leave it off. And that is like this. Nahi jnanena satrasam pavitram iha vidyati tat swayam yogasam siddha kalina tvami vindati. Truly, there is no purifier in this world like knowledge. He that is perfected in yoga realizes it in his own heart in due time. And it depends on your pain threshold about it. There's a famous saying, what cannot be cured has to be endured. And we develop some patience about it. See Vivekananda's P's, where purity, persistence, and patience is required. So we'll go on then to the question of Shraddha. We all take different time periods to grow and develop. And in that same way, you can ask, is there any time limit for the attainment of jnana? Is a good question. And so, well, depends on your intensity of practice and your level of faith, that is unwavering conviction. See, even if you have a theology of sin, what is sin? You can define it in this way, lack of faith. Because if you really had faith that all this was only one without a second, was only the immortal self, was only God seemingly fragmented, if you truly practiced this presence, if you truly saw, if you put in a religious language, God's face in everything, then what flaw would there be? What mistake would there be? It all only occurs because of forgetfulness, and forgetfulness occurs because we don't have faith that that is reality. That's the difficulty. We leave it up there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Right.